All right, all right, all right. Let me see. Methinks we are good. Let me see here. All right, all right, all right. Welcome to episode 806, 806 of the Black Brain Trust. This is Black Cultural Intelligence, the cultural impact of Booker T. Washington, Act 3. So, for those of y'all that don't know, this is part 3 in a series on Booker T. Washington. Now, first and foremost, before we get going, waiting for Rod L to come up. Let me just do a sound check real quick. Um, First of all, I gotta do this. It's been a minute since I've done this, you guys. Yeah, it's been a minute. Hold on. Welcome, everyone. All right, gratuities. We're gonna put that right there. All right. Then I'm gonna do this. Press. Sound is okay in music. Okay. Can you guys press like 806 or something? Let me know if the sound, like, is the music too loud or I ain't done this in a while, man. I think the settings are off. I'm not sure. You guys can kind of confirm that for me. That would be awesome. Um, there he is. Truth says, I don't hear any music. Okay, so hold on one second. Let's try this. We're gonna do this, this, this. How about now? How about now? Truth. Bishop Macbone. TBBT, Complex Design. What's up, brother? Booker T was the first one to emphatically and insist that black American men should learn and master a trade and craft. Bishop Macbone, first of all, salute to you, brother. I'm glad you could join us this evening. Second thing to that is literally the central theme of what this live stream is about. Take it down a little bit. Thank you, Rael. I knew it was off a little bit. I knew it was off somewhere. Hold on. Let's see. What about there? Is that cool? What about, yeah, right there? You guys let me know. Okay, perfect. All right, cool. Raul, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
Chilling, man. How I sound?
You sound perfect, bro.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, man. Just to kind of recap, right? This is a series really centric on the point that Bishop Macbone had just put there in the chat. So, what we're going to do is we're going to continue with that theme. Hence, Act 3, right? You ready to rock, bro?
Oh yeah, I'm ready to go.
You got it.
All right, folks. We're just going to continue the linear projection of where we started. um, we've had some time to let the first two soak into people's consciousness to get a feel for this. As we said from the outset, um, this is going to ruffle feathers. We knew this coming in, but what we wanted to do is give credit where credit is due, and also try to figure out from a consciousness perspective why we're having so many problems coming together and working together. One of the things that we hope to do is uh, distill that particular information to Black people across the board, men and women, so we can have an understanding of how we got here to where we are, um, and making sure that we look at ourselves differently. Um, knowing this history allows us to look at ourselves quite differently than the narrative that we have about ourselves collectively in terms of not having the ability to work together, which is one of the most insidious lies that has been promulgated. Um, not particularly, not just outside of the group, but more importantly, by people that's supposed to be within the group, and that's one of the most important things that we wanted to do, bring to bear by giving us information. Um, we stopped at this point of where Booker T. Washington was saying how Black people, in terms of economics, would do quite well emulating Jewish people, and so we want to pick back up off where we left off concerning that. Um, and so we'll just go right into this. Washington's assessment of Jews as a group to learn from reminds me of something uh, Malcolm X said years ago. Malcolm stated, "quote from of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And when you see that you've got problems, all you have to do is examine the historic method used all over the world by others who have problems similar to yours. And once you see how they got theirs straight, then you know how you can get yours straight." Unquote. This observation from Malcolm connects directly to what Washington observed in his lifetime. Washington was willing to draw inspiration from wherever he could, identifying Jews as a group to emulate regarding economic enfranchisement. Boston notes of Washington, quote, Washington was completely aware that he espoused a materialist business philosophy, and he stressed that he would recommend it to any group at the same stage of economic development as African Americans during the post Reconstruction and Jim Crow eras. This profound statement demonstrates not only Washington's confidence in his business philosophy, but in how his business philosophy can be replicated amongst other groups of people as well, as African Americans. This is best exemplified in Teddy Roosevelt using the National Negro Business League as a template to set up the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. However, Washington possessed a view that it was not just enough to produce capital, but to also have a charitable orientation toward those who are less fortunate. This is where you have Washington's community-centric approach to business, because they were one and the same. It was the purpose was making money, but building up and uplifting Black people at the same time. So that's a very important point to remember. It was never just about the money. There were people like Du Bois who tried to make it seem like it was just about money. Even people in the present day take on this approach when they deal with Booker T. Washington, but it's not true. He had a community centric approach to business development. Um, Boston writes of Washington, Reflecting back on his school days at Hampton Institute, Washington felt and articulated that there was one thing greater than material wealth, and that was character. To Washington, character was something that was not inherited, but developed usually through struggle.
Mm.
Unlike the robber barons of his era, who believed strictly in economic survival of the fittest, Washington thought it the duty of the privileged to manifest character by helping those less fortunate. The formation of this idea probably was influenced by the subordinate position Washington saw his race in and the constant oppression they endured. Thus, as principal of Tuskegee Institute for 34 years and as a national leader, Washington patterned his life according to this idea, promoting honesty as an important characteristic for African American entrepreneurs. In conjunction with this charitable philosophy, Washington proposed that captains of industry were needed to lead the masses of African Americans to economic freedom and ultimately equality with their white neighbors.
Pause.
Yes, sir.
Repeat that
Where you
first.
gonna pause
Repeat that first part.
it? uh, let's see. Uh, in conjunction with this charitable philosophy, Washington proposed that captains of industry were needed to lead the masses of African Americans to economic freedom and ultimately equality with their white neighbors.
So not academia.
No, and
The industrialists.
no, and also too to keep in mind, because now we're talking about strategy at this point. So for the people that who like to say like, well, he didn't like to agitate because he was willing, he wanted black people to be subservient to white people. That's not true.
You want to do business.
What he was trying to do was use business as the conduit to bring black people with some sort of parity with whites. So it was just a different strategy that he employed.
They think, see, people, when you take that sort of the W.B. Du Bois approach, it becomes personal.
Right.
Okay, it becomes personal, whereas business is never personal. Shout out to EPMD.
Right. Right.
Go ahead, you got it.
Yeah. And that's the important distinction that people miss, with him is this notion that he wanted to have black people be subordinate to white people. That was not
BS. It's a lie.
his philosophy at
It's a
all.
lie.
It was just a different strategy to get there, But what's ironic is most people would not have thought that his mindset was to use business and the business class to advance the interests of the group, which is what other groups of people do
Right.
in America. I mean, that's how other groups of people are successful. They use business to advance their interests. And I'm gonna give you all a prime example. There was a time when me and an ex of mine we went to a Chinese restaurant, and we would go there frequently. So we were familiar with the people who worked there. And there was one day we would come in there, and the little young boy would be at the table. He might be playing his video game. And then another time we would come in, we would see him doing his homework. And then another time we would come in there and we will see um, them teaching him how to work the register and take order. And I remarked to my ex at that time, I said, he's getting the full range of an education. Like he's getting the creative stuff with the video games. He's getting the educational stuff as far as like schoolwork. And he's learning business all in one space. This is exactly what Booker T. Washington provided for black people at Tuskegee, specifically black men.
Right.
That full range of an education. And this is why he was so confident in black men, being produced in Tuskegee, being going out there leading black people to the proverbial promised land, because in his mind this was the creative force, because business is creativity.
Well, and I was going to say what it is whole archic, right? So for those of y'all that don't know, whole archic means 163 degrees of knowledge. It's all encompassing, right? He wasn't just going to send you out there half cocked.
Right. Right.
Okay, that was never his MO, and that's why it was the institute was to educate, but then there was also the business component. So you went out into the world as a complete person. And just real quick, just address this comment. Can we say that black men in America are disrupting the global dynamic of WS? We know what that means. Not particularly, no. I would say that the change in global dynamics vis-a-vis fourth industrialization. This is why, once again, the central theme of what we're talking about here, Booker T said, be indifferent to all that crap. It's not your concern.
Right. Right.
Go ahead, bro. You got it.
Boston goes on to say he expressed this idea after being made cognizant of the fact that many of the masses wanted to improve their condition but were unaware of how to do so. It is ironic that close to the time that Washington proposed this idea, W.E.B. Du Bois had promoted the notion of the talented tenth, an argument which posited that African Americans needed to provide higher education to the brightest 10% of their race so that those individuals could lead the rest to real freedom and equality. In 1889, at the Atlanta University Conference on the Negro business on the Negro in business, Du Bois proposed in a formal resolution that merchants should be the best trained young men to be found. Okay.
Mhm.
While Du Bois's plan was elitist in that only the best and brightest were to be given access to higher education, Washington's plan asked that individuals pull themselves up and then lead the masses from within, as he had done for the masses of people surrounding Tuskegee Institute in Macon County in the state of Alabama and eventually throughout the nation. Du Bois's mentality was that only 10% of blacks were capable of leading African Americans towards a better future, whereas Washington wanted the masses on an individual basis to lead themselves, which would ultimately lift the group into more prosperity, which would lead to more practical political aspirations.
That's why I didn't want to stop you.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't want to tell you to pause. I knew. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah. Now go ahead, man.
No, I did that because I was gonna infer that, but then next you know you just read it.
Yeah.
Right, because there was the talented tenth, as they called it,
Right.
right? And then Booker T more or less appealed to those who just had initiative. You didn't have to be from a certain class or a family or this or that. You just had to have that initiative within you.
Right.
And if you did, he's like, I got an institute for you.
Right. And a lot of people don't, they don't know Du Bois's background. Where Du Bois grew up, they had for the young men who were the smartest, they would provide funding for them to go to school in terms of higher education. And it was at Harvard, but he didn't get a chance. He didn't get the chance to go to Harvard at first. For some reason, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he had to go to a lower tier university first.
Mhm.
But basically, it was based on competition, and so, but his class mentality was that this elite group is supposed to lead the group, But again, we have to be careful in how we define elite,
Mm-hmm.
in certain contexts.
Right.
So, because based on the things that Booker T. Washington was implementing, he was elite, but he was more elite from the common man perspective.
I
He
was gonna
believed
say he wasn't some talented tenth elite.
no, he believed that the the common black man was more than capable of elevating himself.
Right.
That's what he believed,
Right.
and his work exemplified that philosophy.
Right.
Um, to go on, from our vantage point, Du Bois didn't seem to believe African Americans were capable of developing the internal capabilities to build a fortified community, while on the other hand, this is precisely what Booker T. Washington believed, and that was the fundamental difference in our estimation. Washington believed in African Americans' abilities because he was surrounded by African Americans who might not have been the most educated, but had the ability to build tangible institutions that best represented African Americans' interests, thus ensuring African Americans were a less dependent group.
Hmm.
And this is the focal point that a lot of people need to understand. The purpose of what he was doing was to keep black people from being dependent. The more successful black people were in business, the less dependent they're on. Um, even Napoleon said this years ago. Napoleon said that um, the hand that giveth is more powerful than the hand that
They're
receiveth.
taken. Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
so Booker T understood this concept. So when he was getting this money from philanthropists and stuff like that, he had a mission to accomplish, and that mission was to get black people in a less dependent state by building the institutions black people needed to keep themselves from being dependent upon government and overall philanthropy long term. Um, Boston brings this home when he writes, Washington also thought that these captains of industry, by example and precept, should convey to the masses of African Americans that they must develop a pioneering spirit. That is, the will to take business and financial risk. To get ahead, he felt that such was necessary. He tried to push his people, especially the educated ones, beyond being mere laborers who generally would be paid a steady wage or salary. Now let's stop here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now this is very powerful in what they're saying about Booker T. Washington, because he is saying he's saying here that from the educated perspective, he didn't want these he didn't want black men to get trades just to go work a job for people.
No.
That was not the goal. That was not the end goal. Um, because he knew, as a lot of people know, that a wage can lull you into complacency,
Yep.
and it gives you just enough. Booker T. Washington didn't want just enough for black men. He wanted abundance. And this is why he wanted black men to take their trades and turn them into actual businesses so they could be ultimately become entrepreneurs. That was the real aim of Tuskegee, was entrepreneurship, not trades. Trades was just the means to the end goal. The
If you were
end
gonna
goal was entrepreneurship.
if you were gonna be like an iron worker, like a craftsman, you may as well be a goddamn master craftsman.
Right.
Master iron. You may as well go ahead and just right be that guy, and then open up shop. May as well.
Right. I see Mac Bone said the talented tenth and the skilled laborers are both very important for the improvement and evolution of the black community. Well,
What we want to do is get away from the notion that there's a talented tenth.
right. Well, also Booker T was not against learned people of
Right.
that ilk. Um, if he was, he would have never offered Booker T. Du Bois the opportunity twice to come to Tuskegee and teach, because much of the social science research that Tuskegee used to teach the black students was based on a lot of the work that W.E.B. Du Bois had conducted. So
Hmm.
he was not against
He
that.
wasn't. Yeah,
He wasn't
exactly.
against, he wasn't against scholarship. What he was against was theorizing for the sake of theorizing and going nowhere. That's what he was against.
Talking for the sake of talking.
That's what he was against.
Now, Rob, you want to? I kind of want to tackle this one. You want to get it?
No, go ahead. No, you got it.
Okay. Here's the thing. What you'll find is in parts 1 or 2 of this, Ryla's kind of touched on some stuff. We're only about 30 minutes into this live stream, right? There's some more that we're going to uncover here. And then even going into part 4 of this, there's another part to this after this one. What you're going to find is that that is not 100% true. And what it was a lot of subterfuge from within. That's really kind of like the crux of the whole sort of Booker T, W.E.B. Du Bois sort of. It really wasn't much of a Hegelian, really. What it was a reorientation of black folks' priorities at the time. It was a reorientation of it. See, what it was a philosophical battle. That's what the whole breakdown of these live streams that we're doing. This is what this is about. We're speaking from the Booker T. Washington position, right? And what Ryle just said like 5 minutes ago, there was actually a place for W. Du Bois within all of this. So in theory, there actually was no need for separation. And what you have is you have those within us and amongst us that opt for that. And listen, if there's money in it, people are going to put money in it. Is what it is. Right,
Well,
Ryle, you got it.
people have to realize too at this particular time, there was a vested interest in the North and the South to have peace. Specifically, I mean, you just had a war, so
Civil War.
there was a vested interest for there to be some semblance of peace, so that business could flourish and thrive. And so, because at this particular time, you're seeing industrialization really ramp up. So this is why Booker T was like trying to get black men to be first in line. Like, hey, yo, get these trades. So they need you. They need your skill set so you can get this money, build up your own economic infrastructure, and be able to be self-sufficient, self-sustaining as a group. So when they saw somebody that was willing to play ball, play the game in Booker T, um, it was. I mean, it was just very practical to work with him because he was willing to play ball. He was willing to sit down and do business.
But don't businesses have like a business intelligence unit, as
Yes,
they call them analysts,
right,
right? See, so there is a place within business for, let's just say, a temporal based positions or white collar, as they call it, right? There's a place for that within institutions. Greater institutions do have an intellectual arm. That's what your analysts do,
right.
right? They process data and information. They say, okay, look, this is going to be the best thing for us to do for the next fiscal quarter.
Hmm.
Let's prepare for that, given all the data and stuff. So there is an intellectual component when it comes to that. That's why I was telling the brother Soft Hands, and he made this comment right here. And yeah, wait, hold on. No one's wrong in this. I mean, that's because what we're doing is we're speaking from the position of Booker T. Washington and how he saw all this. This isn't us. We're just we're just giving you guys the information on this, I mean, based on what it is that Rael and I have been discussing over I don't know how many goddamn months now, and the
Right.
books and all the stuff that we've been digging into. This is actually the position. We're just relaying it. So no one's wrong in this conversation here. Go ahead, Raul.
Um, to continue, Boston states that in reference to Booker T, uh, quote, he knew that real economic wealth was based on ownership, someone implementing a plan to supply a demand. Consequently, he advocated that African Americans venture into all realms of lawful activity. In our view, Washington was challenging Black men and women to engage in commercial enterprise, which in his view was the pathway to freedom for African Americans. Time and time again, we see Washington's philosophy operate as building blocks, where the first wave sets out to create the economic foundation for African Americans. And once that task is completed, African Americans who followed this blueprint were expected to add another layer to this foundational concept through similar works, ensuring that each layer fortified the structure, ultimately delivering African Americans a bevy of institutions that will serve as their protection. In other words, Washington's philosophy towards economic enfranchisement was to have African Americans building by their own for their own. As Boston continues, he writes, an expanded professional class could be supported, and future generations would have a base from which to begin. Hence, in Washington's view, a group making itself economically viable ensured its natural and constitutional rights. To succeed, Washington felt that individuals should cast down their buckets where they were and begin to build up material foundations in their communities and beyond. Once again, we see Booker T. Washington's community centric business philosophy being emphasized here. Washington's philosophy, in conjunction with understanding how the system functions, understood that securing an economy went hand in hand with securing rights. Boston continues with the following. Taken together, these components constitute Washington's entrepreneurial philosophy, which was his plan for obtaining real freedom, empowerment, and equality for his people. He wanted African Americans to embrace his values and beliefs concerning business creation and development, and to implement these beliefs and values once they were acquired. In essence, he pushed African Americans to acquire entrepreneurial mindsets and entrepreneurial practices, becoming pioneers unafraid to go out and create something out of nothing. He realized that in America, this is very this is important. He realized that in America, workers were either owners of the means of production or wage earners. He wanted a significant majority of African Americans to be the owners of the means of production because he realized that such citizens profoundly affected policy in America. It is in business and industry, Washington wrote, that I see the brightest and most hopeful phases of the race situation today. He also noted the Negro in this country must become, in a more potent sense, a producer of wealth as well as a consumer. He must become more of a businessman, must enter all avenues of industry.
All
Washington,
avenues.
Washington solidifies his position beautifully in this passage. What what I love about this passage about Washington is that this seems to be a manifesto for Black men, a challenge to answer the call African Americans needed post slavery and post Reconstruction. What's so fascinating is the fact that Washington had so much confidence in African American men to rise to this challenge and be successful executing Washington's business philosophy. He believed was the answer to Black people's woes. Um, this challenge reminds me of Reginald Lewis's book, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? A book, in my estimation, issues a similar challenge to black men. For those of you who don't know who Lewis is, he executed the largest leveraged buyout acquisition of a foreign company by an American company at that particular time for roughly $1 billion. This was in the late 1980s. This acquisition, according to Black Enterprise magazine, created the first black-owned conglomerate to generate more than $1 billion in annualized revenue and inspire generations of black deal makers on Wall Street. Lewis's book is a must-read for any black man, whether he's in business or not, because of the inspiration one draws from Lewis's confidence and clarity about being a man who moves the world instead of being moved by it. But before Lewis, Washington was moving black men in the same fashion. Lewis was just continuing a tradition that Washington made popular during his time. Washington recognized early that drivers of industry in America drove policy during his time. That was true then and remains true now. Washington knew African American men and African Americans as a whole were already behind. So his directives were meant to give African American men and women a jolt, to wake them up and impress upon them that this was no time to cry, but a time to get to work
Mm.
and build institutions that serviced our needs and wants, which meant we needed to be producers and not just consumers. Another aspect of Booker T's business philosophy that stands out was his focus on black women. Now, before I go, you want to end
Uh-oh.
with something?
Oh.
Go ahead.
No, there's this comment right here. You see it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Dayu.
All right, you got it.
Absolutely. Just to kind of jump on his comment. Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot. Like, your cultural identity, whether you okay, if you hear about Chinatown, what do you hear? What
China,
immediately comes to mind is
China,
China,
Chinese,
identity,
culture,
culture, and
business.
business, all wrapped in one. There is no such thing as a Chinatown without a business philosophy.
That's literally what it's comprised of, bro. Businesses.
You know, there is no Chinatown without the business backing it. And when black people get upset when people come in and move on their communities or gentrify areas, the reason why people are able to move in these areas is because you have such a low center of gravity as it relates to economic activity. So you make it very easy when you don't engage in true business development. And I'm not just talking about barbershops and hair salons. I'm talking
And
about
chicken wing spots.
chicken wings, but I'm talking about like real high level like industries. Okay. Um Concerning women, Boston writes about Booker T. Washington. At a time when domestic values served as a leadership force in the lives of American women, especially those of the middle class, the National Negro Business League during Washington's leadership was always encouraging female entrepreneurs. They joined the National Negro Business League and often formed separate women's business leagues that worked in conjunction with the national body. At a future date, we're going to cover some of these black women who were part of the National Negro
Yes.
Business League.
Yes, we will.
um, because we feel it will be dishonorable to not um, pay homage to the women who were actually a part of the business endeavors of Black men during that particular time,
Right.
who drew inspiration from Black men of that particular time and formed businesses of their own. People like Madam C.J. Walker, who was actually a member of the National
The
Negro Business League,
yeah, the business league.
which we'll cover. So at a later date, we're going to address specific individual women as well, because we want to bring balance to both sides. Um, this was very interesting to find out about the National Negro Business League concerning the contributions of women, Black women, especially when we see in spaces like these where there is nothing but conflict between men and women. Uh,
Right.
Learning about the contributions of Black women towards the National Negro Business League was very inspiring, to say the least. Boston continues. When Washington called for the assembly of the National Negro Business League in 1900, he wanted positive responses from women as well. He recognized that their advancement was a critical component needed for the progress of his race. In traveling throughout the country, he also saw women engaged in business ventures performing hard and often unsung labors. Um, like the men, he wanted them to come to the Boston meeting and all ensuing gatherings and not only share their experiences, but also fraternize with fellow business persons. Booker T. Washington very much appreciated the input of women who represented the ethos of what the National Negro Business League was all about. He wanted women to support the mission of the National Negro Business League because he recognized they have value just like women do other groups, women of other groups do. When you look at financially successful groups, women are vital participants in the economic expansion goals of the men. For most people who are hearing this, this would seem like a foreign concept for African Americans now. However, as we can clearly see, this was encouraged in women from men like Booker T. Washington, who truly believed women had a seat at the table in moving African Americans forward economically. Boston states further, women were always an integral part of the National Negro Business League as a driving force behind entrepreneurial ventures. Their advice and suggestions were generally respected. Thus, ever since the first meeting of the National Negro Business League, uh, one or more women were usually placed on the agenda as speakers. The criterion for membership was not gender, but whether an individual was engaged in a business venture. Now, this is very important to understand because we have seen throughout the century, not centuries, but decades of these talks about you know uh, diversity, inclusion, empowerment of women, and things like that. But we already was incorporating this stuff 100 years ago, over 100 years ago,
Now,
as black men.
do you see this comment right here? Now, the username is killer. The username is killer.
That's funny.
That's funny as shit. But do you see what do you see what this person said?
Yes, spot on,
Spot on.
spot on. So we showed a capacity at this particular time to incorporate women in a organization for business. Um, when in 2023, people are still having a hard time wrapping their minds around the idea that you can have women in certain spaces where men are, and if they're treated with respect, you can actually get some things done. because we did it. We did it.
Yeah. I mean, we do it today. That's the crazy part.
Right. Um,
I have a person who helps me, right?
of course.
Yeah,
Shout out V.
yeah, yeah. Shout out V.
Um, this was astounding to find out. We live in a world where male and female dynamics are probably the worst we've ever seen them. To see this level of cooperation between uh, African American men and women under such circumstances should make all of us proud, no matter what gender we have, no matter what political affiliation we have. Boston continues. For instance, at the first meeting, Mrs. A.M. Smith, Dora A. Miller, and Emma L. Pitts offered addresses, and this inclusion of female speakers was continued at other meetings. The types of businesses that female members of the National Negro Business League were involved in were usually those associated with roles commonly designated for women in the early 20th century, such as restaurant owners, caterers, milliners, dressmakers, manicurists, and hairstylists. There were, however, women operating in fields then atypical for their sex, such as doctors, pharmacists, and even a banker. So they talked about how we had black women who were bankers back then.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of
Tell
their
you about
line,
my aunt.
oh yeah, your aunt, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, Regardless of their line of work, all moral and honest labor performed by these women was considered noble by the National Negro Business League, which preached Washington's doctrine of finding an economic niche performed better than anyone else and expanding. As we can see, black women were a valuable addition to the mission of the National Negro Business League. What is clearly demonstrated by Booker T. Washington is he understood that it takes men and women to build culture. What Booker T. Washington was initiating was not just an economic expansion model, but a cultural transformation, taking a people who were formerly enslaved to a people who were expected to not only produce goods and services for themselves, but also help build a political infrastructure that would serve their own interests. Obviously, this was no small feat, but what was surprising based on the narrative most African Americans have heard was to see Black women were a vital component to this endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Boston goes on to say, perhaps the most famous female member of the National Negro Business League was Sarah Breedlove Walker, better known by her commercial name, Madam C.J. Walker. Walker ultimately became a millionaire by developing a hair care products business which successfully sold merchandise throughout the United States and abroad. Historians have implied that Washington behaved in a sexist manner toward Walker when she attended the 1912 National Negro Business League annual meeting. Walker, according to these historians, was invited to speak by Washington. Before speaking, however, Walker had to wait while speaker after speaker presented their address. And after being continuously ignored, she finally stood up and aggressively began delivering her own testimony.
Mm-mm.
First exclaiming, surely you are not going to shut the door in my face. I feel that I am in a business that is a credit to the womanhood of our race. Many of us have heard of Madam C.J. Walker, but most of us never knew she was a part of the National Negro Business League. This shows how effective the National Negro Business League was as an organization to be instrumental in the eventual success of Walker's enterprise, no doubt learning aspects of business which ultimately ensured her status as the first female millionaire. Walker's statement about being a credit to the womanhood of our race is powerful because of what it represents. Walker took pride in representing Black people as a woman who contributed to the forward expansion as a businesswoman. She was not representing just her gender. What she represented was the ability of African Americans to be successful in the business arena, an arena that was assumed to be only the domain for white men, a sentiment unfortunately, which is still shared now by Black people, sadly and ironically, when these Blacks saw things very differently. To see Walker take such pride in being a Black woman representing the interests of African Americans vehemently is something we all can be proud of, men and women alike. Boston continues of Walker. After she had gained and maintained the attention of League members, she further commented, I went into a business that is despised, that is criticized, and talked about by everybody, the business of hair. They did not believe that such a thing could be done, but I have proven beyond the question of a doubt that I do grow hair.
Hmm.
Because her story was so impressive, she was made a keynote speaker at the next annual gathering. Whether Washington was being sexist is difficult to determine, but judging by the correspondence exchanged between him and Walker, they appear to have had a respectful working relationship.
So basically, Booker T didn't take no shit.
No, no, and man, he wasn't disrespectful of her either.
No, he wasn't. But I'm just saying he didn't take no shit. That's basically what
No.
I'm reading.
I doubt seriously that Walker would have been a part of an organization where she felt her talents weren't respected. Making Walker a keynote speaker at the next gathering solidifies for me that Walker was respected in the National Negro Business League precisely because Washington, when having speakers speak, did not want people to just bloviate and just talk ad nauseum. He wanted African Americans to share their secrets of success to other African Americans. He wanted them to talk about their best practices that made them successful. Because he valued the input of African American women, there is no doubt Washington valued Walker's success in her story, which he would have wanted her to share with the National Negro Business League. Boston continues. Nonetheless, as insinuated by Walker's remark, men dominated the National Negro Business League. They made up majority of the membership, the majority of delegates attending the annual meetings, and the lion's share of those presenting papers or addresses. Men were also predominant in the leadership roles. This pattern was a product of the times and was in line with the standards of the Victorian era that many blacks and whites, especially elites, followed. Nevertheless, the recorded testimonies of male league members reveal that successful male entrepreneurs generally paid homage to their wives for not only being partners in their undertakings, but also for being crucial to their very success.
Oh wow, look at that.
At the end of an address, when a male delegate, and this is very important for black men and women who are listening or who ever listen to this to really take in, to listen to this. At the end of an address, when a male delegate would be asked who contributed toward his success, it was not unusual for him to say that it was his wife. Some even say that if it had not been for their wives, they would have failed or given up. This
Hmm.
is absolutely fascinating. African American men and women working together, using economics to help build each other up to be the best versions of themselves, is something that has become a foreign concept to African Americans now. But during this time was a norm evidenced by the growth of black businesses during Washington's leadership peak at the National Negro Business League. Anyone that is in business can attest that you can get to a point where you want to give up, where it can be really challenging. Business is the ultimate investment in self. You have a vision no one else can see. And many times, people who can't see your vision can be your most vocal naysayers. A naysayer can be your mom, your dad, sister, brother, other family members, spouse, even the group you belong to. Based on the collective unconsciousness of the group, many times when you choose to engage in business, African Americans react hostile or give you the impression that it can't be done, accomplished. But what have we learned here is that blacks had the complete opposite view regarding economic expansion, which contributes to healthy family formation. and healthy communities, which families serve as the foundation of. Seeing African American men and women working in unison under the circumstances against the backdrop of what was at stake is truly remarkable because it flies in the face of what we all have been taught most of our lives, that African Americans don't work together and can't work together because we're crabs in a bucket. This history completely eviscerates that common perception African Americans have of each other. Boston goes on to say, John Wanamaker, a successful white store owner, was asked by Washington to address the National Negro Business League. After seeing female delegates at the 1905 New York National Negro Business League gathering, he complimented the male delegates for incorporating women into their organization as well as their business lives. As Boston notes, observers of the operations of the National Negro Business League were impressed at how well incorporated Black women were in the organization. We can't forget that this organization began in 1900, 35 years after chattel slavery ended.
91900.
We're talking about a people who some of them experienced slavery and yet were able to coalesce around a common theme, value system, to bring about a true community, not based on being Black, but being Black and productive, which would bring about the formation of a community.
Man, repeat that shit again.
We're talking about a people who some of them experienced slavery and yet were able to coalesce around a common theme, value system, to bring about a true community, not based on being Black, but being Black and productive, which would bring about the formation of a community.
Fresh up out of slavery, as they say.
Now, it's important to note that outsiders, what this talks about is outsiders were surprised and respected how well Booker T. Washington incorporated women into the organization. So when we say outsiders, we're talking about whites. See, many of the ideas that you think were white people's ideas was ours. Was ours. Booker T. Washington has written multiple books that really talk about his business philosophy. As you can clearly see, he believed that Black women were an integral part of expanding the group from a business perspective. Okay. And people from the outside took notice. People from the outside took notice and remarked at how well he integrated women into the National Negro Business League. Knowing that an organization like the National Negro Business League existed, where there was cooperation amongst Black men and women to further develop the economic enfranchisement, which leads to political enfranchisement, has completely debunked the narrative of Blacks not being capable of working together.
Hey, Rock, oh, give me 1 second. Hey, just go ahead and rock. Give me like 2 minutes. Go ahead, rock, though. Go ahead, rock.
Okay.
All right.
It was very encouraging to see that Black women were very much a part of the institution building within Black America, institutions that would be developed for the specific intent to protect and defend African Americans and their interests. I'll stop there and let him come back because I need to use the bathroom right quick. But stay tuned, folks. We'll be back.
All right, folks. We are back. Uh, we had a little brief intermission there. I had to go visit the little boy's room. I think Ryle did too. And I'm on dad duty 24/7, so I just check on my little one, check on my shorty, see how she's doing. Ryle, you there, bro?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. All right, man. We good.
All right. Before we conclude, we want to cover the influence Booker T. Washington has had throughout the years over the trajectory of the lives of African Americans. See what Boston has to say about this. Boston writes, to demonstrate the pervasiveness of Washington's entrepreneurial philosophy over time in major dimensions of African American life and history. This chapter on one level seeks to begin examining the predominance of Washington's broad influence and to show that he is the father of the extensive promotion of 20th century African American business development. On a much broader level, it seeks to explain why Washington's entrepreneurial philosophy so strongly impacted African American life and history many years after his death, inspiring a great number of people. In this context, individuals who acknowledge that they internalized aspects of Washington's business philosophy, which helped shape their economic outlooks, exemplify influence, as do individuals who were indirectly inspired by Washington through the influence of a mentor or leader. What Boston acknowledges here is the unsung impact Booker T. Washington has had in Black America. The ghost of Washington looms large over the Black experience because of the many people he impacted. Boston continues, this effort has not been seriously undertaken before for a number of reasons. Primary among them, Du Bois's famous critique of Washington. Moreover, a firm historical interpretation has existed which argues that since Washington was supposedly promoting obsolete skills and a segregated African American economy, his economic program was not only ill considered but also unusually narrow. Acceptance of this interpretation, in all probability, has served to convince many scholars, Black ones especially, that further research on Washington or his economic programs is futile. However, as has been consistently argued throughout this text, Washington's entrepreneurial philosophy was much broader than scholars have generally characterized it as, being since it was a critical basis of his leadership program. For this reason, if we are to continue to rediscover and redefine Washington and his historical significance, it is imperative to begin to examine Washington's vast economic influence on major dimensions of African American life and history. Boston wants his reader to know that Booker T. Washington's reputation and history has to be revisited because of the likes of intellectuals such as Du Bois, who really set the stage for how Washington has been portrayed in Black America specifically. This point cannot be underestimated. Du Bois's labeling Washington basically a sellout has done untold damage to the stature of Washington and has been an intellectual character assassination behind the pen of Du Bois. Boston, through analyzing African American entrepreneurs, leaders, and intelligentsia, attempts to show regarding the entrepreneurial dimension, which he's successful in doing, how expansive Washington's influence really has been in Black America. Regarding the entrepreneurial dimension, Boston writes, an almost endless list of entrepreneurs were inspired by Booker T. Washington's economic message of self-help, both while he lived and long after his death. Indeed, from the time of the first meeting of the National Negro Business League in Boston shortly after the Civil Rights Movement, any African American community, North, South, East, or West, that has substantial African American population generally had a number of entrepreneurs who were significantly impacted by Washington. Undoubtedly, this consistent pattern serves as evidence for the pervasiveness and enduring popularity of his views. Boston lets his audience know the depth of Washington's impact regarding his influence in Black America. This impact was felt in all corners of America. Remember, the National Negro Business League had chapters in 34 states, which is remarkable due to the fact there was no social media in existence at this time, yet Washington's reach stretched vast and wide. Boston writes concerning Philip A. Peyton, one of the many African Americans Washington influenced. In Harlem, New York, Philip A. Peyton Jr., a respectable member of the National Negro Business League in 1904, founded the Afro-American Realty Company, a firm that rented Harlem properties mainly to African Americans. Peyton, besides being a successful businessman, is most remembered for opening Harlem to African American tenants. This is pretty interesting because many of us know the history of Harlem and how popular it was for the explosion of jazz and other forms of entertainment Harlem was known for. But many of us didn't know the economic influence Washington had on the likes of Peyton. I actually was reading some stuff recently that showed how, because of men like Peyton who were influenced by Washington, the Harlem Renaissance actually was able to actually develop because of the economic move that people like Peyton made in Harlem that made it possible for Black people to actually live in Harlem.
Yeah.
So you're talking
I was going
about,
to say Cap Calloway was a part of that too.
right. So you're talking about Washington's influence was so heavy that it ultimately led to what we know as the Harlem Renaissance because of the environment that was able to be created by business people like Peyton,
Right.
who were able to make it possible for Black people to live in Harlem, because at a certain point Harlem was predominantly white, like it was a white community. Well, many of us didn't know the economic influence Washington had on the likes of Peyton, who no doubt made it okay for Blacks to live in Harlem, which ultimately allowed the Harlem Renaissance to be possible. As Boston continues, reputedly, one angry Harlem realtor, in attempting to get revenge on another Harlem realtor, allowed Peyton to rent apartments in one of his buildings to African Americans. This event caused a white flight, thereby opening up rental properties and ultimately all of Harlem to African Americans. And as history has shown, Harlem grew to become one of the most, if not the most, cosmopolitan African American communities in the nation. Boston goes on to write concerning Peyton. Peyton, who was also instrumental in helping to organize the 1905 annual National Negro Business League meeting in New York City, attributes his inspiration for organizing the Afro-American Realty Company to the ideas and work of Booker T. Washington. It was while he attended the 1902 annual National Negro Business League meeting in Richmond, Virginia, that he gained the inspiration to form his company. Furthermore, after the Afro-American Realty Company was formed, Peyton brought in other National Negro Business League members as shareholders or members of his board of directors. Now let's stop here.
Mm-hmm.
let's stop here. Okay. Are we talking about anything differently than what these men were talking about?
No.
Not at all. The things that we have been talking about in this space that we have been urging black men to listen to is the very things that these men did at this particular time. The very things. And they were willing to bring each other into the business with each other, make each other shareholders of their company, put them on the board of directors.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking we're
Same
talking
thing.
40, 35, 40 years after chattel slavery, black men creating a business consortium to work together to make money together so they could build institutions for their communities. Like wow, like what a concept.
I
Like
know, right?
something that other groups of men do for their groups as well. The only difference is our group is the only group that has attacked their business class for over 100 years. That has gone gone to such great lengths to marginalize their business class because, as E. Franklin Frazier put it, engaging in business for black as black people was trying to be white. Okay, this idea from a black academic, if you want to call him that, has contributed so much to the poisoning of um, how black businesses are viewed in black America. Because much of the people who have gone to college and have gotten degrees have have been indoctrinated with this particular mindset that was promulgated in E. Franklin Frazier's Black Bourgeoisie. Um, so these men understood what was necessary, what was needed. As Alonzo said when he first came into space, Alonzo Hall in the chat, black men at this particular time were focused on become, how to get control in industries. That was their mindset. Um, and it's a travesty how the black intellectual class has really, for over 100 years, has taken a dump on the the um, the business successes, the attempts at business um, by black people post slavery and post Reconstruction. Because what y'all are going to find out as we do more content about the history of black business, you're going to find out that black business formation post slavery and post um, Reconstruction is one of the most inspiring feats our people have ever put forth in this country. To go on, his most popular stockholder and board member was probably Emmett J. Scott, the corresponding secretary of the National Negro Business League and Washington's personal secretary. Peyton exemplifies the business philosophy of Booker T. Washington. Peyton turned a negative, the fact landlords wouldn't rent to blacks in Harlem, into a positive, and ultimately helped open the door for blacks to transform Harlem into a black cultural oasis through art and entertainment. Another African American Booker T. Washington influence was Dr. Ezekiel E. Nelson. Boston writes of Nelson: Dr. Nelson, who resided in Buffalo, New York, was a physician and businessman. Unlike Peyton, he was not a member of the National Negro Business League. However, he recalled in later years that the Black uplift themes of the Washington era had a major influence on his thinking as he strongly considered attending Tuskegee Institute. Like Washington, he espoused self help and racial solidarity as viable strategies for the economic advancement of Buffalo's African American community. Unlike Washington, he espoused cooperative economics or co-ops for 4 decades, from 1930 to 1970. Dr. Nelson worked with almost fanatical zeal to convince African American residents of Buffalo that cooperative economics and racial solidarity would enable the race to escape from poverty and economic oppression. He preached about working together, pooling their resources, and supporting cooperative enterprises. African Americans could build powerful institutions that would enable them to produce many of the goods and services that were needed and desired by the community. Supporting these types of business activities, he felt, would create jobs, particularly for the young, as well as ensure a higher standard of living for all involved in the cooperative ventures. And the profit generated could be reinvested into the community to establish new businesses. Thus, similar to Washington, who Dr. Nelson greatly admired and was impacted by his adage about self-help. Once again, once again, Washington's impact is felt, this time by a student of Washington, even though Nelson didn't attend Tuskegee. What makes this so impressive is the fact that Washington's ethos permeated throughout Black America. Washington's business philosophy was not class-based, unlike Du Bois's talented 10th ethos. Du Bois's approach was more messianic, whereas Washington's philosophy was more grassroots. The community-centric approach Washington was known for, Nelson exemplified with his approach to Black economics. Boston continues. In Tennessee, particularly Nashville, as in Buffalo and New York City, Washington's influence was also pervasive. James C. Napier, who was a banker by profession, a friend and associate of Washington's, and a man deeply inspired by Washington's entrepreneurial philosophy, organized the first Tennessee branch of the National Negro Business League. Following this, he helped generate other branches in towns and cities throughout Tennessee, making Washington's idea of business promotion a reality. Reflecting his allegiance to and respect for Washington, in a letter Napier wrote to him concerning 2 lectures delivered by Du Bois, Napier noted the following, and I really want people to really pay attention to this because this is very important to listen to. W.E.B. Du Bois had a good audience at each meeting. There was a fine occasion for him to impress some fact, some practical idea upon the minds of a large number of intelligent, ambitious, and progressive young people. He seemed not to have discovered this opportunity, and during his 3 hours failed utterly to offer a single word of advice or counsel touching the practical side of the life which these young people will soon have to face. His paramount aim seemed to be to show that he had profound learning and had made deep research. No thought of the influence he might exert in shaping the lives or activities of the hearers seems ever to have entered his mind. He simply showed learning. This represents a powerful analysis by Napier because it simply cuts right to the heart of why Du Bois couldn't work with Washington, and quite frankly, why this tension still exists in the intellectual battle of how to move African Americans forward. Napier, as a businessman, was a man about action. He would not have been interested in Du Bois's approach, especially when he had so many impressionable Black minds before him who needed a practical way forward. From Napier's point of view, Du Bois seemed to be more in awe of himself than inspiring the youth before him. No different than the likes of your Michael Eric Dysons, your Cornel Wesses, your Lamont Hills, types.
Yeah,
Du
those
Bois spoke,
guys.
Du Bois spoke from a position of intellectual privilege in which not only do they exist in an intellectual bubble, but they also exist in an ivory tower bubble in which they enjoy the status and privilege as well as the funding power the institutions they represent give them. But they tend to be disconnected from the very people they claim to want to help. It was very easy for Du Bois to deliver scathing critiques toward Washington's strategy while he enjoyed the safety of Harvard's campus, while Washington had to help blacks navigate a post slavery as well as a post Reconstruction environment in which the protection of federal troops in the South for blacks was removed. Intellectual stimulation means nothing if you're too dead to read. When he couldn't win the intellectual argument, Du Bois resorted to questioning Washington's manhood, which is another way of questioning one's blackness, and this tradition has continued to this very day. I noticed some years ago when me and a young lady, this is an experience I had with this one particular young lady, and whenever we would talk business, we would always get into it. One day, as we were talking about making money, she said, "I want to make money, but I don't want to become evil." This is a young black chick in my college. And I replied, "Why do you assume because you have money you will become evil?" I then asked her, "Have you ever lived in the hood?" And she replied, "No." And I said to her, "I have, and trust me, there are some evil things in the hood too." My point was, where did she get this idea from? Why was her default setting business people are evil and poor people are good when based on Washington's business philosophy? Business can teach people good values and character. It is precisely because of the slant Du Bois took towards Washington, which Garvey experienced worse at the hands of the Garvey Must Go campaign pushed by the black intelligentsia.
Wow.
Napier demonstrates, even back then, the disconnect that someone who, even from Du Bois's position, had amongst African Americans. One of the most important aspects of human development is mentorship and what it means to develop to the development of the youth. True elders give the youth something to look forward to aspire to become. Unfortunately, black intellectuals' words seem to have no effect on the elevation of consciousness of our youth, nor spark curiosity and creativity. Napier ends with this. After it was over, so Napier was sitting here with his wife listening to Du Bois speak, and he's remarking on how disconnected Du Bois is from the very youth he's preaching to. He said, after it was over, and Mrs. Napier and I came to compare. Now, this is a black man and a black woman talking about what they had just heard. To compare, we agreed that there was little or no benefit to be derived from these lectures, and that one of your speeches of an hour's length would result in greater benefit to the race and to all who might hear it than a whole month of such recitals would bring.
Jesus Christ. So I wonder what they would think about all these 8-hour live streams.
Ooh, ooh. Do you? I want you people to really understand what's going on here. There were people back then who didn't agree with Du Bois. They saw his position as a futile position.
Agitator at best. Modern day BLM.
Like he was a professor at Harvard. He was in a very privileged position. He didn't have to deal with the things that people like Booker T. Washington had to deal with in the South. He didn't have to deal with the Klan. He didn't have to deal with stuff like that. So much of what he taught, because even in my experience in college, I went through the same experience with black people in college. I used to tell people it's one thing to write a paper on black people's struggles. It's another thing to actually who have to have lived through a struggle. It ain't the same. And many of these educated people, they have not really had that kind of experience. And even if they did have that kind of experience, they go the agitation route instead of actually building something that's going to fortify you against all these things in the environment. It's like when we were primitive people and we would we would be out in the rain getting rained on, and we didn't try to figure out a way to create a shelter. But
Right.
we complained about rain all the time.
But it's like,
Then
damn, it keeps raining and shit.
right. But we at a certain point we had to figure out like, okay, we might need to take some of this dirt and these trees and this wood and break it down and create a structure that we can live in so we can
Yeah.
protect
Make
ourselves
this thing
from
called a
animals
roof.
and bugs, the wild the nature's elements. We wasn't pontificating then. We was figuring some shit out. And that's what Booker T. Washington and his ilk were doing. They were figuring it out. And they were being successful at doing so. It's not like the criticisms leveled by Du Bois at Washington was based on the idea that what he was doing wasn't working. No, he admitted it was working. It was working. But his main gripe was the fact that he believed that the black intelligentsia or the black intellectuals had a right to lead black people through what scholarship.
I mean, here's the thing, right? If you're gonna admit on the one hand something's working, well, listen, don't shit on that. Just go ahead and do what you think you need to do.
Well,
Don't shit on it though. Don't make that the antithesis. But that's exactly what he did.
right. So we have to, and we're going to really delve into this intellectual side of Black America deeper. This is just the starting point for this, but we have tons of research that is going to bring more balance to this uh, debate and discussion. And honestly, it really isn't a discussion because what black people in their right mind are arguing against black owned institutions? Like, who is really arguing against that? Because it makes no sense. It literally makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, you should not be doing that.
Like, you shouldn't be doing that. Um, um, what's interesting about this section of his letter to Washington was he and his wife were in unison with what they observed about Du Bois. They didn't really see any value of what his lecture was about, which is an aspect we need to tease out because Du Bois, with his rhetoric at this specific time in American history, I believe contributed to the deaths of blacks because many whites at this time would not have taken too kindly to being agitated, especially in the South, by the likes of Du Bois, who would have been seen as an uppity, educated Negro, especially in the South, which made Washington's Atlanta Cotton Exposition speech so appropriate. Because Washington recognized there were many whites in the South licking their wounds after suffering defeat after the Civil War, and he wanted to make sure not only African Americans survived but thrived. What many view as an accommodationist speech was a speech for survival. When Booker T. Washington visited the White House, he received death threats for merely accepting the invitation from Teddy Roosevelt.
Mm.
So the threat of death for black people, especially black men, was very real during this time, and anyone agitating white racists during this time were literally putting black people's lives in danger. Instead of believing he had some sort of divine right to speak on behalf of African Americans like Du Bois clearly had, as noted earlier in the presentation, Washington went before actual respected community leaders and sought their input before he went before the public to speak on behalf of Black people. What Napier's letter reveals is Du Bois really didn't have the pulse of what Blacks needed like Booker T. Washington did. Just to name a few more people who were influenced by Booker T. Washington's economic philosophy, we have Arthur G. Gaston, who Boston writes, Washington's entrepreneurial philosophy was deeply ingrained in him. Initially, through Washington's visit to the school, he was able to attend Tuskegee Institute and Gaston's Reading from Slavery, a book that deeply impacted his life. According to Boston, Gaston's favorite idea concerned merit because it convinced him that merit was the key to business success, not color, and this gave him hope that despite rampant racism, he could still succeed. So, what we need to understand is that um, in business, you have to have an optimistic worldview, or you're not going to be successful.
Right.
Like you cannot go into business thinking like, oh man, these folks ain't gonna buy my product because I'm Black. Like you just can't do that. Like you're not gonna be successful. So what they're saying is that Gaston approached business with a very optimistic worldview, um, which it's amazing how Black people are more offended by the racist times that these Black people live than these people.
I know.
It's like you're living in less racist times, but you're offended by racism you've never even experienced.
I mean, it's isn't that amazing when you hear like the amount of debate, and it's like, were you there? Because it seemed like the people that were actually there had a completely different mindset than you, the person here today, talking about that shit. Ironically enough.
Right, right, and that's the reason why there's the business class and the intellectual class. We have had 100 years of information that has been produced where we can really have this conversation. But see, back then they really didn't have that conversation because it was just really kind of still early in the process. But once Booker T. Washington and Garvey was locked up, that created a vacuum that allowed Black intellectuals to step in and basically rewrite history. And so now we have to take a step back and look at what the results are now from both sides. Like what did the business class produce? What were they able to accomplish? And what were the intellectual class able to accomplish? And so that's obviously why we're engaging in this particular endeavor. According to Boston, Gaston established the Booker T. Washington Burial Insurance Company, which offered life and health insurance to African American patrons. Shout out to you, Alonzo Hall.
Alonzo Hall.
He also opened the Booker T. Washington Business College to train individuals for business careers. Are y'all hearing what is going on, man?
Whole Arctic. I told you guys earlier in this live stream.
Are y'all listening to what is taking place, man? Creating business schools so Black people can learn business, man. Being inspired by what Booker T. Washington represented. In 1952, he founded the Vulcan Realty and Investment Corporation to buy, sell, and manage real estate in the growing Birmingham market. In the early 1960s, he opened a motel and restaurant to accommodate African American victims of Jim Crow laws, he started the Citizens Federal Savings Bank in response to difficulty African Americans were encountering when attempting to borrow money to finance their homes and churches.
Hmm.
And finally, he constructed the A.G. Gaston building to rent out office space. Boston also states that who was a longtime member of the he was also a longtime member of the National Negro Business League and eventually served as its president. Boston also states about Gaston in 1992 on the eve of his 100th birthday. Black Enterprise magazine bestowed upon Gaston the title Entrepreneur of the Century. Someone else who was inspired by Washington was Herman Russell. Boston notes Russell attended Tuskegee Institute and studied building construction. Um, for people who don't know about Herman Russell, he's done a lot of building in the Atlanta area. For people who don't know that. Boston notes Russell attended Tuskegee Institute and studied building construction. After taking over his father's valuable plastering business, Boston notes he expanded it. After proving his company's value by constructing 4 and 500 unit complexes. Quote, Russell as a subcontractor won a job to build the Equitable Life Assurance Building, one of the tallest buildings in downtown Atlanta. I've seen it. He also won a contract to build the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center and participated in a joint venture helping to build the Metro Atlanta Rapid Transit System known as MARTA.
Mm.
Boston also notes Russell believed in Washington's adage of helping those in need. He frequently worked to provide jobs for indigent African Americans. So as we can see, Washington's influence was felt throughout Black America in a positive way. Where are we at on time?
You know what, dude? We're at 140. Let's clip it at 2 hours. Let's rock for 20 more minutes, and then we'll pick it back up. I don't know, like maybe like Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday. I don't care.
All right.
Because we gotta spin the block on this one.
Yeah. Regarding Washington's leadership dimension, Boston writes of Maggie Lena Walker. She believed that the only sure help was self-help, and she promoted this principle to her race in general, but especially to women who she saw as co-partners of men. Thus, in the Order of St. Luke, a benevolent religious society that Walker joined at the age of 14. She rose through its ranks, and by early adult years, Walker became an acknowledged local community leader of Richmond, Virginia. In this role, she promoted efforts to end segregation, lynching, Jim Crow, railroad cars, and unequal education for African Americans.
Mm.
Moreover, as her sense of duty increased, Walker became an even more active community leader. For instance, she became a board member of the Urban League, a sponsor of the Boy Scouts, a supporter of the YMCA, and an active member of the Negro Organizational Society, the Virginia Interracial Commission, and the NAACP. Once again, we see another African American who represented Washington's community-centric ethos. Whether man or woman, African Americans inspired by Washington truly incorporated his community-centric philosophy. Time and time again, we see this ethos demonstrated regarding any African American inspired by Booker T. Washington. Boston further writes, one reason why Washington noticed Walker is because in 1903, through the Order of St. Luke, Washington indirectly took some credit for this as well as for the creation of other African American owned and operated banks that were formed throughout the nation.
Mm.
Soon after, August 23rd, 24th of 1900, the period when the National Negro Business League first met. Washington, as well as several of his cohorts, emphasized that it was the influence of the National Negro Business League that sparked and accelerated such entrepreneurial activities as Walker's Bank. For people who don't know, she was responsible for setting up a finance corporation as a black woman. Furthermore, before acknowledging her in his books, Washington congratulated her upon her success and honored her by asking her to speak about banking before the National Negro Business League, to which she consented.
So much for him being a sexist, right?
Yes, indeed. Maggie Lena Walker, another black woman who crossed paths with Booker T. Washington, clearly represented her race well as a black woman who started her own bank with the help of her sisters at the Order of St. Luke, and more than likely drew inspiration by her participation within the National Negro Business League. As Boston notes, like Washington, she promoted land owning and implemented this idea by helping African Americans gain loans through her bank. Boston writes concerning Marcus Garvey. Desiring to see other countries and find employment, he traveled throughout the West Indies, South America, and parts of Europe. On these journeys, Garvey was aware that wherever he went, people of African descent were on the bottom echelons of society. With this in mind, while in London, he came across Washington's second autobiography, Up from Slavery, and eagerly read it, concerning the profound impression it made upon him and how it helped him to determine his life mission. Garvey later wrote, I read Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and then my doom, if I may call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me in London after I had traveled throughout almost half of Europe. I asked, where is the black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, and his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men of big affairs? I could not find them, and then I declared, I will help to make them. As we can see, Washington's Up from Slavery clearly was the catalyst for Garvey's strategy of economic development. Garvey was deeply inspired by Booker T. Washington's economic philosophy and wanted to emulate it. Boston writes, shortly after being exposed to Washington's ideas, Garvey hurriedly returned to Jamaica and formed his organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, actively corresponding with Washington to seek approval and advice. While in Jamaica, one of the first projects that the UNIA proposed was the creation of an industrial school similar to the Tuskegee Institute. As noted by the Daily Chronicle, a Jamaican newspaper, the Universal Negro Improvement Association is about taking up and putting through a scheme to establish in Jamaica a large industrial farm, an institution, a large farm and institution on the same plan as the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, of which Dr. Booker T. Washington is head. The object of the farm and institute will be to provide work for the unemployed and to provide the opportunity of training young colored men and women for a better place in the moral, social, industrial, and education life of the country. Young men and women are to have the opportunity of learning a vocation and to gain a sound moral, literary, and industrial training so that when they leave the institution, they may, by example and leadership, help to change and improve the moral and industrial condition of the country.
You know, it's interesting. There was multiple times there where you said men and women,
Yes,
men and women, men and
yes,
women, men and women. There wasn't a mindset like I think something that I really do think people need to kind of really process. What oftentimes people do is they view history through a modern lens,
right,
right? Like a lot of this shit that you guys know today that takes place on these social media platforms. I'm throwing this in air quotes, gender war. and all
Hmm.
that kind of shit. Does
Hmm.
this sound like there was any indication that that shit existed back then?
Nope.
All
Nope.
right, I just want to make sure I wasn't getting it fucked up, dude.
Nope.
All right, okay,
Nope. I mean, you're seeing it. I mean,
okay, all right, just make sure I'm getting this straight.
Garvey, inspired by Washington's economic model, sought help to develop Jamaica's youth so they could be the ones to build Jamaica's infrastructure and economy, just like how Booker T wanted the youth to learn the skills. So when his generation passed away, they could take up the mantle and keep moving it forward. Um, like Washington, as Boston notes, Garvey thought that establishing an economic foundation should be an African American's first priority. And he believed that a good character was an essential ingredient, not only as a sign of civilization, but also as a means of upward mobility. This economic philosophy should also align with political interests as well. As Boston notes of Garvey's biographer, Tony Martin, the most important area for the exercise of independent effort was economic. Garvey believed, like Washington before him, that economics was primary. Successful political action could only be found on an independent economic base. After people have established successfully a firm industrial foundation, he wrote, they naturally turn to politics and society, but not first to society and politics, because the two latter cannot exist without the former. Garvey viewed politics the same way Washington did. They both believed political interests were the servant of business. This is why Washington and Garvey's plans were so critical, because the faster they could train students, the faster they could train students, they could build an economy. Boston continues regarding Garvey. Garvey, who believed in undertaking capitalist ventures in the United States and in other countries, including the continent of Africa, so long as a significant amount of the proceeds were to be used to build a United States of Africa, established the Negro Factories Corporation and the Black Star Steamship Line, naming one of his ships the Booker T. Washington.
Uh-oh.
The Black Star Steamship Line was part of an intricate plan to purchase, through the sale of stock, a chain of ships that would carry a number of African Americans back to Africa. And the Negro Factories Corporation was established with the intention of developing black businesses throughout the world, generally where a significant number of blacks lived. Thus, although the leadership approaches of Washington and Garvey differed, Garvey acknowledged this difference and nonetheless admired Washington and his work and learned from him, and considered him a true aristocrat of his race, sprung up from the masses. When we think of what's known as Pan Africanism, we can clearly see that without Booker T. Washington's vision, there would be no economic blueprint for Garvey to use as a template to push his mission. Garvey was emboldened by Washington's Herculean efforts regarding economic development and felt a sincere duty to play his role in the global effort to bring economic stability to Black people worldwide. Boston continues concerning Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam when he writes, Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam from 1933 to 1975, was also influenced by Washington's entrepreneurial philosophy. But this influence mainly was affected indirectly through his exposure to Garveyism. Upon arriving in Detroit during the 1920s, Muhammad joined the UNIA along with many other Southern migrants. There he learned many things, including entrepreneurial philosophy of Garvey, which not only had been significantly impacted by Washington, but also paralleled Washington's after becoming a leader. After becoming a leader, Muhammad, like Garvey, taught his followers that in addition to separation, only hard work, frugality, and self sufficiency could achieve economic stability and ultimately real freedom. Unlike Washington and Garvey, he felt that Islam was the true religion of African Americans and that the spreading of it could not only unify them but also improve their economic predicament as well. Concerning this, Muhammad wrote, "It is a great job trying to change the so called Negroes from the ways of their slave masters and to unite them. It may take much suffering, but I say that it can be done. Islam will unite us all. I know Christianity can't unite us. Instead, it divides us. That is what it was intended to do, to divide us. The religion of Islam makes one think in terms of self and one's own kind. Thus, this kind of thinking produces an industrious people who are self independent. Irrespective of the religious angle, Elijah Muhammad's business philosophy mirrors that of Booker T. Washington's, which foundationally was community centric. In reference to Harold Cruz's assessment of Muhammad, it was nothing but a form of Booker T. Washington's economic self help, black unity, bourgeois hard work, law abiding, vocational training, stay out of the civil rights struggle, agitation, morality. The only difference was that Elijah Muhammad added the potent factor of the Muslim religion to a race, economic, and social philosophy of which the first prophet was none other than Booker T. Washington. Cruz is correct because in Muhammad's book, Message to the Black Man in America, where he explains his economic plan, business ideas similar to Washington's are evident. For example, he emphasized values of the Protestant work ethic, especially the virtue in hard work, discipline, self reliance, saving, and spending only when necessary. Like Washington before him, he also stressed purchasing land for farming and resource extraction, as well as group work ventures. Moreover, Muhammad's students, particularly Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan, promoted his entrepreneurial outlook just as Washington's students had spread his. Washington's imprint on the black business culture cannot be denied. Without a shadow of a doubt, Booker T. Washington is the preeminent force behind black business expansion for well over 100 years.
Hmm.
Now, we know we gave y'all a lot. There's more to come.
I mean, dude, honestly, dude, because the first two that we did were like 3.5 each. We got started late because if we would have started early, we could have kept rocking, right? But we could. There's a lot in this. This is 2 hours. There's a lot in this one.
Yes.
For 2 hours, there's a lot in this shit.
It's we want to impress upon y'all, man, that again, there's a lot of things that you're gonna have to put out your mind. You're gonna have to get away from this focusing on white people. The system is this and all that type of stuff because you can't compare your present day situation to their situation and make those kind of excuses because it just wouldn't be appropriate to. It's actually disrespectful to the work that they put in. These people did not put the work that they put in to see black people 100+ years later just sit and complain all the time.
And just like awesome.
They could have did that. They could have just quit and said, "Forget it."
I'm saying like that. You would have today. You would have more justification for taking that position if that had always been the position.
Right. And that's what we're trying to impress upon y'all is that showing the dynamics between the National Negro Business League and showing how they even incorporated black women into the organization showed that you had competent black men who were leaders. And I'll be the first one to admit that black men from 1865 to up until the 1960s were completely different from post 1960s Black America to now.
I swear to God, bro, this is a different breed,
We're talking about a different breed of man. I,
different
I was
caliber.
ar- I was around my great grandfather who exemplified this kind of worldview and ethos. Like he lived that Booker T model. He lived it, and so I was able to touch it.
Yep,
So
same here.
it had a dramatic and impactful effect on my life and how I view things. And so um, y'all are really gonna have to really, really soak this stuff in. You're gonna have to really, when we given the sources and stuff like that, like you're gonna have to crack this stuff open, man, and really see for yourself, like you've been had, man. You've been bamboozled. And you've been bamboozled. You've been
To the
bamboozled,
degree at which we're gonna drip feed and slowly uncover this shit, but like to the degree at which, yeah, this these live streams should kind of piss you off a little bit.
right?
They should piss you off a little bit.
Right. You're gonna find out that you've been bamboozled, you've been hoodwinked, but you've been hoodwinked by people who look like you.
That's the cold part.
That's when you realize. I'm just gonna say it, like much of your history that could actually inspire you to be better than what you are has been stolen from you, primarily from your black intellectual class. And I know when I say this, I know I'm saying a lot when I say this because I know that just flies in the face of what you believe. But I'm here to tell you that we have the evidence that backs up everything I just said.
Hmm.
There is nobody in this space that can argue with our points. Nobody. I don't care if they got masters, PhDs. I don't care if they sit on president's council. I don't give a shit. They
And
cannot
shout out,
refute.
and if you got them, select, salute and shout outs to you if you got them. I mean, we're talking more about this position, right, with regards to the impact that Booker T. Washington has had. That's our sole focal point on this.
Yep. I
So
mean,
smoke them
y-
if you got them.
y'all are really going to have to. You, I'm gonna put it to you like this: you need to be very careful of any black people that consistently lead you to a direction where you're constantly agitated and ready to fight all the time.
It's not a good place to be.
That's not a good place to be. If you're constantly being led to a place where you're angry all the time, that's not a good place. It's not a good place. Um, we have brothers on this channel who cover things where we show young black boys getting into science and tech and seeing how their world just lights up because they're creating. They're doing something that's impactful in their individual lives. And as they get older, they're going to take that mindset out here and go create. They're going to solve problems that we have in the world because that's the kind of children that we need to be raising.
Hmm.
Children that can be problem solvers. And if you're constantly inundated with content that has you aggravated, angry, aggravated, pissed off all the time, your mind is not clear to think and to be in a state where you can actually create and come up with ideas because you're so angry. That's all your brain can hold. And so y'all are really gonna have to really take these sources, man, read, study, and it's a lot,
Yeah, they say two opposing thoughts can't occupy the same space.
right? And so,
You have to choose how you want to orient yourself.
yeah, these people, I'm gonna put it to y'all like this: our experience in terms of how we responded to the environment, how our business class responded to the environment, that had a lot of oppression in it, is no different than other groups of people's response to that same similar kind of oppression. We had classes of black people that wanted to demonstrate to people who, specifically the people who were oppressing black people, to prove to them that black people belong. They went out there to be successful at business, to be great at business, to make black people as a whole look good. And it's very ironic that the very black people who went out there with that mentality to make black people look good through a business lens have been the black people who have been attacked the most. When these black people were literally talking about creating their own. When the people who are advocating, who have advocated for things like integration and things like that, have shown that they have no confidence in black people whatsoever. And they are the ones that celebrate it. They're the ones that celebrate it. There's a video between Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen when they're on the sidelines, and it's a timeout. And they taking a break, drinking Gatorade, and Michael Jordan says to Scottie Pippen, he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said they can't win until we done. That's how much confidence he had. That's how much confidence he was. That's what they were sharing with each other in terms of like brotherhood. Like, yo, they not getting this title over us. They can't win a title until we quit, until we
done.
leave.
So, like, once we out here, that y'all got it.
Then you got it.
You got it.
But until then, you ain't getting this one.
Uh-uh.
And that was just, man, when I first seen that, man, it was just awesome to hear. Like, yeah, like y'all ain't getting none of this shit. Like, we taking this, and you have to have that kind of bravado, man. You have to have that kind of that cockiness. That's why if anybody accuses you of being cocky as a black man, that means you're doing something right.
Well, I would just say, don't be quick and swift to correct people and just say, well, don't get cockiness and confidence fucked up.
Right.
Let's make sure you're not getting your perception of me fucked up. This is confidence, sweetheart. It's not cockiness.
Right.
The difference.
And there's nothing wrong with it. There's when you go in a lane like this, man, and when you told me how you got them bikes, I was like, boy, that was some kind of shit, man. Like,
do what you got to do, right?
Like, bro, like how you pull that off? Boy, I was like, yo, for real?
Yeah, you gotta be shrewd sometimes, man. Work shit out.
Yeah, man, and that's ultimately what we want to really communicate in these particular streams as far as the business class is to communicate the confidence and the self-esteem that these black people have in themselves. They thought of themselves. It's very ironic to see that black people coming out of the slave experience had a high self-regard for themselves, had a high level of self-esteem, and a high level of confidence in themselves. That, to me, that's the most surprising thing that I've seen, is the level of self-esteem and confidence these black people had. They were not apathetic. They didn't say, hey, well, we don't have any money. We got our slavery, man. What we gonna do, man? They got
right to it, man.
They got to it, And one of the books that we're going to cover talks about some of the inventions during this time. There was so many inventions by black men.
That's gonna blow wigs right there.
During the 1800s, man. Y'all have no idea how much black men were creating, man. I mean, y'all have no idea. And I'm talking about creating things that added to the level of productivity in America as a whole, not just for black men, not black people, but for America as a whole. Y'all do not realize how much inventions we created that helped America develop as a nation in its totality. And so for you to not engage in America, especially from a business perspective, you know, um,
Doing your
you
ancestors
don't,
dirty.
yeah, you really doing them dirty
Yeah.
because they didn't go through all that stuff for you to
For
be
you to just be on some like on some uh let me shut up.
basically.
Let me
There
shut
was a time when because of segregation, y- black people would be proud to get a job working in a business ran by a black person. Imagine imagine coming out of the slave experience and you walk into a business and you see a black owner in there and they're like, "Yo, this your business?" "Yeah, this is my business." "Wow, man, you did this?" "Yeah, I did this." "Yeah." And how much pride that black person would have seeing a black person facing the same circumstances that they were facing have a successful business. A lot of those black people, man, came to those jobs filled with pride to see another black person start a business, something that they probably wouldn't even think was possible at this particular time.
I mean, just think about all of the when you look at the pictures of like especially like brothers and how we used to dress back then. Like let's just say in like 1920s, 30s, 40s, right? Motherfuckers was suited and booted.
Hmm.
Okay. Who was tailoring all them suits?
Come on, bro.
I'm gonna leave it right there, dog.
Come on, bro. You already know. You already know. We're here to in our personal lives. We're doing that work. We're doing that work.
Good shit.
We're doing that work. We impress upon y'all. I mean, I don't think y'all really realize like how open this environment is for you. There are plenty companies out here um, who are offering paid training because they need to replace so many of their, you know, workforce or bring in people in their workforce to ramp up their production. All that. I mean, it's gotten to the point, man, that you got top companies, man, Fortune 500 companies, man, that are going to prisons, man, recruiting dudes from prison to work when there used to be an albatross around their necks to keep them from employment. That's how bad it is. You can't get a better environment than that as black men. And I'm not saying like all, black men are criminals. I'm just saying even
Yeah.
for that class of black men, there are opportunities. So if you don't have that kind of background, you have
That means there's even more opportunities
even
for
more
us.
opportunities for you. So you have to really get out here and really take advantage. Stop looking at the systems being fair. There's never been a time in history where the environment was fair to any men to get out here and compete. You have to get into it and compete. Do not let any of these naysayers talk you out of your genetic intelligence and your genetic intelligence be suppressed because they want you to believe in this complaint politics. Is old, is tired, and even back then, black people would criticize those types of black people who were agitating white people. Even Frederick Douglass himself was criticized for being parts of those groups of black people who were agitating. So even the great Frederick Douglass didn't get a free pass. He didn't get a free pass. Okay. So we have to understand, like, when we looking at these people from a historical perspective, we got to see the record. We got to see what the record is so we can have the full story because we've been operating on a lie for over 100 years that was never true. Our
Hmm.
business class tried to make us look good as a people. They did not try to make us look bad as a people.
And they were damn sure were no sellouts either, man.
And they were not sellouts. They were putting us in a position to really get to a point where we could get some power and influence. And yes, we had issues. We know about the Tulsas, we know about this and that and the fourth, but some of that stuff that happened to us, we have contributed to that too. Because we had black people who were out here agitating, like your Du Bois, who basically sent the green light to some of these people to attack black people.
I mean that's that. See that? Well, we're gonna cut it right here, man. I was gonna say that's the whole point of agitation. We'll leave it right there.
Thank y'all for coming out, man. We'll be coming. We'll be dropping some soon, so just be on the lookout for
Yeah,
us.
no, we're gonna follow this one up because we like I said, man. Typically we go like 3.5, but this one was like, well, it's like 2:15.
Yeah, we almost
So
done. We almost done
yeah,
though.
we almost done with it. So yeah,
Yeah,
okay, we'll circle back maybe next weekend because this is a lot to soak into.
yeah, yeah.
This one's a lot to soak in.
We got about we probably got about 400 more slides to go. So
Okay,
yeah,
all right,
so we good.
so
Yeah,
we good. Okay, all right. Hey, well, look, I appreciate y'all for coming out, Rael. Hey, you already know, broski. You already know what it is. If y'all haven't hit the like button, please do so on the way out. Shit, if you haven't subbed, I saw a couple people I hadn't noticed in here before. If you haven't subbed, man, please do. And we'll circle back on the next one, man. Peace out, y'all.